Good afternoon. It's Friday the 19th of January 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Ben Rubin, Debi Evans and Cheryl Grainger. So we will get straight on. And the world, it appears, has gone absolutely mad as all the mentally ill gather in Davos this week. We have exercise steadfast defender. Of course, we were talking about this on Monday. We mentioned the fact that the UK is sending 20,000 troops to take part in this NATO exercise. This is the largest NATO exercise in decades. It's, they said, going to put new Allied defence plans into trial. Of course, this is all about Russia. 90,000 troops from all 31 allies and invitee Sweden will train together in order to keep their people safe, they say, defend their territory and safeguard their shared values. So let's just have a look at a little bit of video here. This is Admiral Rob Bauer speaking at the recent Defence Ministers' meeting.
Welcome to this 190th Military Committee in Chiefs of Defence session. The tectonic plates of power are shifting, and as a result, we face the most dangerous world in decades. NATO has entered into a new era of collective defense, and together we are defending much more than the physical safety of our 1 billion people and 31, soon to be 32, nations. We are defending freedom and democracy.
So by creating war, they are defending freedom and democracy. This is brilliant stuff. Now, the 32nd member, of course, is going to be Ukraine. So at Davos a couple of days ago, Jens Stoltenberg, he had this to say.
Security is not longer regional, security is global. So what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what happens in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, of course, we don't regard China as an adversary, but China's heavy investments in modern military capabilities, including more and more advanced nuclear weapons.
So while they're exercising about Russia, of course, China is there as well, and NATO expanding massively at the moment. Now, back in 2020, the NATO expansion shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's been watching the UK Column News, because we covered this in 2020. NATO launched its NATO 2030 policy document. This was all about, they said, making the alliance even stronger. This is about the expansion of the alliance outside of its normal remit, which is Europe, and into Asia as well. Now, at the time, or sometime later, a French retired general had this to say about NATO 2030 policy. So let's bring him on screen. This is retired General Gregoire Diamantidis. He's a former French Air Force general. And he said, NATO 2030 sets out NATO's missions for the next 10 years. From the outset, it's evident that NATO is fully gearing itself towards a two-threat paradigm, a Russian menace, which presented as already present, and a Chinese menace presented as potential and yet to come. Two key vectors leap out from NATO 2030, this NATO 2030 study. He said, first, the marshalling of Europeans against Chinese designs on planetary domination, the quid pro quo for which is US protection of Europe against the Russian threat. Second, the removal in several ways of NATO's previous cornerstone, the rule of consensus in decision-making. And he went on to say, in reading through NATO 2030, what clearly emerges is a monument of quiet bad faith, surreptitious disinformation, and exploiting the Russian threat. Remember, this is a retired French general talking this. He's talking about NATO's behavior here. He goes on to say, they talk about a threat blatantly created and subsequently maintained to make European allies toe the US line in preparation for the looming struggle with China for global hegemony. He said, not only do you plan to transform defensive NATO into an offensive alliance against an enemy that is not Europe's enemy, and we've got to remember this issue of transforming defensive into offensive, this is Britain's defence policy as well. He goes on to say, this report goes further, squarely heading for an organisation where the world political ambition, that's NATO he's talking about, holding sway over all other international organisations. Not content with having wrecked Europe's chance of a real lasting peace desired by all, NATO, motivated only by self-preservation and overreach, has triggered massive rearmament. And now through this NATO 2030 document, you seek to justify the military purpose of this alliance by transforming it into a political instrument that can even override United Nations resolutions and national sovereignty. This defies even elementary logic, which dictates that the mission should justify the tool and not vice versa. Didn't even the Romans say that soldiery must yield to statesmanship? So no, Mr. Secretary General, we must stop this mad train before it's too late. France should never go along with this adventure of accepting American tutelage of Europe without betraying General de Gaulle's principles. We must stop this mad train before it's too late. It's absolutely clear now, as you'll see in a second, that the rhetoric is one of war, and we've got to stop it. So let's just remind ourselves about how NATO has been expanding. First of all, let's have a look at this. The joint statement on the trilateral United States, Japan, Republic of Korea, Indo-Pacific dialogue. This was January the 6th, 2024. So again, we've got expansion into Asia by NATO. Then we've got the potential for a NATO office in Japan. Now that seems to be dropped in the short term, but that's certainly still being talked about. We've already talked about the AUKUS partnership. This is the United States, the UK, and Australia. And this moving into Asia as well. And also the Quad, which brings in India and Korea into this as well. So just to reinforce this then, let's look at another quick excerpt from Jens Stoltenberg's presentation at Davos a couple of days ago.
China's way of behavior, especially in the South China Sea, and the way China is actually violating core principles for NATO, democracy, the rule of law, journalism, freedom of expression, as we have seen in Hong Kong, all of that matters for NATO. And we also have to understand that this is not about NATO moving into Asia, but it's about the fact that China is coming closer to us. We see them in Africa, we see them in the Arctic, we see them trying to control critical infrastructure. Not so many years ago, I had a big discussion about 5G. And many allies said this is only a commercial issue. No, it's also an issue about our security.
So China is coming closer to us, so we need to go to war with China. Is it not a bit ironic that he's talking about criticizing China there for freedom of expression in Hong Kong, at the same time that Western governments in the EU, the UK and the US are busy shutting down freedom of expression as quickly as they possibly can? It is quite incredible. In the meantime, and in parallel then, Bild published this article, and we'll do a quick translation of the headline. This was a few days ago. Bundeswehr is preparing for Putin attack. Bild knows this is the scenario. Tens of thousands of German soldiers would be deployed. So, they were talking about a path to conflict. They were talking about the various scenarios being given, ascribed to Russia, which were just ridiculous scenarios. But in the meantime, absolutely pointing out the ramping up of the war drums in Germany. And so the Mail decided to carry an interview with Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commander of the US Army in Europe. So let's just have a look at what he had to say. He said the UK has always been aware of the threat from Russia. Well, actually, the UK has done a lot to create the threat from Russia, if there is a threat. Certainly the threat that the UK claims there is through the Integrity Initiative. And if you want to get some background on that, have a look at the page on the UK Column website, a whole bunch of articles related to the Integrity Initiative and how the UK government has built this narrative, this anti-Russian narrative. Hodges went on to say, but now Germany is realizing that this is something that's only going to get worse if they're not prepared. So readiness is exactly what nations should be doing, and Germany is doing that. If the civilian leadership doesn't think there's a threat, they won't be able to move quickly enough. Our leaders should talk to us like adults, he said. It doesn't mean you're a scaremonger. It means you're taking precaution, which is exactly what we should be doing. In the meantime, the UK getting together, because of course it's a hybrid war. It's not just about real kinetic warfare. It's also about cyber warfare and information warfare and so on. So the UK has decided to get closer to Japan with respect to cyber warfare again. So this is on Wednesday. Oliver Dowden meeting Japanese to join together on cybersecurity issues. But the whole war drums rhetoric got particularly ridiculous in Sweden. this week when they had their War of the Worlds moment. And the Swedish Minister for Civil Defence in a public address said, "It is time for Sweden to prepare for war." That was followed up by the Prime Minister saying, "Be prepared to die in arms in defence of values." And as a result, Sweden saw a massive response from the public. They were going out buying portable radios, they were going out buying torches, they were going out buying a whole bunch of other things for preparation for war, clearing the shelves of it. There was such a backlash to this that the Prime Minister had to basically walk back from his original statement. So let's put this on screen. We'll do a quick translation of this as well. So the headline is from Omni here, that he said that all countries close to Russia will be affected. But he's basically saying it's quite obvious that the risk of war has increased considerably. But he's saying that there's nothing to suggest that war is imminent. So the war drums are banging as hard as they possibly can at the moment. And the point here is we've all been warned. And the question is, are we going to sit back and wait for it to happen? Are we going to react like people of Sweden have reacted by going and buying the things that we think that we need because war is coming and there's nothing can be done to stop it? Or are we going to basically tell these people that this position is unacceptable and they need to come back from where they are? At the moment, we are in a very dangerous position, but it's not one that's that it isn't possible to come back from. We've just got to make sure that our position is well understood. Ben, let me bring you onto the program and welcome you and say, have you any thoughts about this? What do you think of the rhetoric that we're seeing at the moment from these people?
I mean, it beggars belief, really, doesn't it? The direction of travel, like we were talking about earlier, just feels like they're trying to drag us into another forever war. The only upside I can see from this is that if we're going to wake up the younger generation, it's going to be them who end up dying on the battlefield. So I think that this will certainly pique their attention.
That's what we can hope. Okay, let's move on, Debi, to the MHRA, and they had their board meeting again this week.
Yes, they did. Good afternoon, everyone. And two big events on one day, Andrew Bridgen's excess deaths debate and also the MHRA board meeting. So let's look at the MHRA board meeting before we welcome Cheryl in, who bravely queued in the ice to watch Andrew Bridgen's excess death debate. So the MHRA, before I detail some slides moving forward, you can see there that the board meeting was on Tuesday. I'd like to give you a little summary before I highlight a couple of things with a couple of slides. So I was delighted that 93 people were registered for the MHRA board meeting. Apologies because I'm going to have to look at my notes because we're not allowed to take screenshots or film anymore. So I have to use my shorthand abilities. So my apologies. So 93 registered, 69 members of the public. Well done to everyone. 13 industry and 9 members of staff were registered to watch. And before anybody asks, no, there was no mention of COVID-19 or vaccine injuries, and there was no appearance from anybody with regards to patient safety. Dr. Alison Cave gave her apologies. She was not there. The MHRA are deemed to be one agency. Perhaps we should call it the Bill and Melinda Gates Enabling Agency. They announced they've got a £4.4 million surplus. They've had an increased trading income and decreased staff costs. So we've got 4.4 million sitting there that they're not quite sure what they're going to do with it. Clinical trials will be accelerated. They've cleared all the backlogs now, and they're actually going to accelerate them even quicker to get approval within 60 days. And we'll look at the O'Shaughnessy report in a minute because the public are involved in this. They're talking about their roadmap of regulation and into medical devices. So they're going to be regulating medical devices far more strictly now. They've got international recognition. They're very excited about that. They say they're going to be working with lots of other agencies. No mention as of yet of patient safety. They're also going to strengthen resilience in cybersecurity. Apparently, it's vulnerable, so they need to tighten things up. Now, the MHRA don't know that the experts are watching them in the board meeting, and one such expert, one of our wonderful viewers, is a health and safety expert. And there's more to come on this, and I'm going to do a blog a special blog next week, an MHRA special. But the National Institute of Biological Standards Laboratory, which is MHRA's laboratory, has been inspected by the Health and Safety Executive. Now, there are recommendations that have been made. Although they haven't received the report yet, there are recommendations that need to be made. And a question was asked at the end with regards to specialised animal pathogens and whether there was a trained safety officer on site. And the answer was interesting. All of that in my blog. Job vacancies, they said they had a reduction. Well, according to their website, they have no job vacancies. Are staff concerns being heard? No, we don't think they are. June Rain, her USP for the MHRA is to streamline access to innovation. But she did agree that it was a debate for the board. My USP, unique selling point for the MHRA, I'm afraid, would be patient safety, but still no mention of patient safety. Finally, I decided to check out the chat room function and see if they listened to any of the comments. And I asked for the board members to stop using acronyms. This message was delivered to Graham Cook, the chair, immediately, and they didn't do a very good job of not mentioning acronyms, but they tried. So if we just go on to the next slide now, because what June Rain did announce was that she was very pleased to be participating in partnership with the UK HSA to undergo surveillance for the people of Britain in case there was a polio outbreak. And there's a new polio vaccine, very keen to promote the vaccines to eradicate polio. This is the NOPV2 vaccine. Now, she also went on to say in her report, and this was one sentence, and I would please like people to take notice of this. She was talking about sodium valproate, otherwise known as Diaxil, Epilim, Epicenter, or Epival. So if you're on any of these medications, please listen or pass the information to those that are. The dangers of sodium valproate have been known in pregnancy for a very long time, and learning disabilities and congenital defects get passed on from generation to generation. So pregnant women, well, nobody should be on valproate. But there is now a new study out to suggest that men can also pass on neurodevelopmental disorders if they are taking sodium valproate. And she made the point of saying that nobody should be on sodium valproate unless there was any other, if you're in a case of status epilepticus, where you're having seizures all the time and there's nothing else available, then that can be used. But valproate is being used for mental health conditions, for behavioral conditions, and bipolar, as well as epilepsy. So really that should be front page news. They also talked about the O'Shaughnessy report, speeding up clinical trials. And you'll see there that I've underlined that this report is from Victoria Atkins. Our ability to deliver high quality research funded by medical research charities and UK taxpayers. So this is where your money's going, into medical research. And finally, board meetings coming up. The next board meeting coming up, please book a date for your diary, is on Tuesday, the 19th of March. So that's an overview of the MHRA board meeting. I'll do a full write-up in my blog, but I want to hand over now and welcome Cheryl Grainger, who bravely braved out the cold and went to see Andrew Bridgen's excess death debate. Welcome, Cheryl. Please give us your report.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Hello to everybody. Yes, I went to the Andrew Bridgen debate in Westminster Hall. As you can see us there, the trend in excess deaths. They only had 20 places for the public. The rest had to watch on a screen. Andrew did a very thorough, composed and focused presentation of the facts based on the evidence and made a convincing case for a further 3-hour debate. He stated that he had enough signatures in order to have had a 3-hour debate on that particular occasion, but we were given an hour and a half. The chair of the meeting was Sir Gary Streeter. He made a lot of points. He talked about the huge rise in excess deaths at a time when we would expect a deficit. He talked about high death rates in the younger age groups. He talked about alarm bells ringing that we don't want to see. We're trying to ignore them. We have seen bypassing of procedures and protocols and science to inflict on the healthy population a brand new untested product, was his words. They talked about the inquiry being a whitewash, already set up the answers that they want to get. They talked about excess deaths that started in spring 2021 with the rollout of the jabs. And these excess deaths have been increasing week by week for months. Also, the inadequacy of the compensation for anybody injured. They mentioned Sir Chris Whitty and him coming out with the reason for all this was because of reduction in statins, which is not true. He states about excess cardiac deaths were not caused by COVID. And he talks about viral infections as seasonal and were already falling before we went into lockdown. And the fact that 1 in 800 doses have been assessed as leading to serious adverse events, repeating at each dose the same sort of risk. The MHRA have released our health data to Big Pharma, but they will not release it to us. And at his reckoning, trust in the NHS, media and politics will have to be rebuilt after all this. He gave way to a Dr. Luke Evans, and I'd like to play a bit of video now.
That even though cardiovascular disease is multifactorial, the top of the list in the hierarchy of causes behind excess cardiac-related deaths has to be the experimental COVID mRNA vaccine until proven otherwise. And this is not speculative. No, I won't give way at this, but let me just finish this trial and I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. This is not speculative, but based on the highest level of data which combines plausible biological mechanism, randomised controlled trials, high-quality observational data, pharmacovigilance data, autopsy data, and clinical data. And those who choose not to acknowledge these cold, hard facts, Mr. Sagari, are either unaware of the evidence, willfully blind, or lack a conscience. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way, and I'm grateful for shining a spotlight on this important debate about excess deaths. But I'm just keen to understand the difference between correlation and causation, because there's a correlation between eating ice cream and sunburn, but we don't necessarily assume the two are together.
Yeah.
It could be sunny weather. The same goes for this case. Is it to do with the fact it's lockdown? Is it to do with late presentation, access to the NHS? These are the key bits to try and understand the causation and correlation, to understand why these numbers are so high.
I agree with the honourable gentleman. He is a medical doctor, so he does have some knowledge, clearly. But correlation is not causation. But correlation is an alarm bell, Sir Gary. And alarm bells are going off all over the building, but no one wants to open the door and see if there's a fire.
So what I've done is I've sent a tweet to Luke Evans to let him know that causation has been shown. So the Bradford Hill criteria is accepted by the WHO. There are 10 criteria, and if you meet 5, they accept causation. We've got Jessica Rose, very thoroughly examined the information and found out that the harm against the COVID-19 vaccines matched 10 out of the 10 criteria. So I've sent that to him, haven't had a reply. And we've also got a conversation on the right-hand side from the House of Commons, and you might have seen a video of this, and this was Dr. Luke Evans talking to Matt Hancock about the good death. What is a good death? A good death must be that we've got the right equipment, the right medication, and the staff to actually do the necessary. And they talked about the levels of midazolam. And that's perhaps something we can talk about more in extra. But basically, there was a lot of midazolam bought, 2 years' supply, that was used up in a very short space of time. So going on to the meeting, Andrew went on and quoted Professor Carl Hennigan and Azim Malhotra and Dr. Claire Craig. Dr. Craig has actually waited too many months for answers to her questions over the production of full statistics from the UKHSA and the ICO. He was also involved many years ago in exposing the post office scandal right from the start. And he used that as an example of how long it takes to unravel a problem through government where no one wants to admit culpability. He also referenced thalidomide and the 11 years it took to actually make any changes. And those changes, of course, were the introduction of the Medicines Act 1968, and that eventually gave us rise to the MHRA. So there were 24 MPs and 2 health ministers. 9 MPs were given 3 minutes each, which wasn't long enough, because the ministers were given 10 minutes each. And these 9 MPs raised various aspects of this. They talked about the silence of the NHS. They talk about viral waves not being affected by lockdown and jabs, the safety of the vaccine postponed in the inquiry, serious concerns about falsifying and concealing data, the health service being concerned with only one disease for a long period of time, and then that they should take people seriously and find out why these excess deaths are occurring. Also, they talked. So one of them talked about schools all having defibrillators now, and perhaps that raises more questions than it actually answers. There was a Sir George Howarth who gave derisory comments about the so-called experts from the last meeting that was held. And one MP emphasised that excess deaths have only occurred since 2021, and 90% of them are not COVID related. The Shadow Minister for Women's and Mental Health, Abina Opong Aseri, apologies if I've not said that correctly, would not give way in explaining the opposition's thoughts. She spoke for a whole 10 minutes. She didn't answer the question, and she stated the primary cause of excess mortality has, of course, been COVID-19. And people I spoke to afterwards commented that her speech was factually incorrect and her delivery was shocking. And then we had Maria Caulfield, the MP, Under Secretary of State for Women's and Mental Health, an ex-nurse, and she doesn't seem to have much more idea. She said that we were more vaxxed in the excess deaths because 93.7% of the population are jabbed. And she also talked about the claims. They've had 8,000 claims. 159 have been awarded, so few. 156 of those are AstraZeneca. And she also referred to the threats of reduced measles vaccine uptake at the moment. So Andrew eventually was allowed to sum up. He was pleased at the gradual increased turnout of his colleagues, and now believes he should have this 3-hour parliamentary debate in the Commons, which he will apply for straight away, because he's not letting this rest. And all I can say is, for those who are vaccine injured, and there were some sitting with me in the public seating, it must be soul destroying to keep going to yet another session where you are on a conveyor belt of meetings, where everything is rushed by the clock. And this is such an important topic, especially to them, that it demands more constructive debate, I'd suggest.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for doing that for us. And I would like to add, actually, that Cheryl did say to me that this is almost treated like a court, because they're not anybody that goes. There were only 20 people allowed to attend, and all of those that attended, they weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to gesture anybody, applaud, make any kind of noise. So it was pretty rigorous. But thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. And I know we'll be talking about more of that in Extra.
Okay, Debbie and Cheryl, thank you very much for that. Ben, let's bring you back on and let's get on to the topic of Davos.
Absolutely, yes. It's the start of the year, so the compromised, corrupt and criminally insane have descended on the World Economic Forum at Davos. Let's hear from Berg Brenda, the World Economic Forum president, about what is going to be going on this week.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders. Do you agree with that, or are there ways of what are we able to keep on the positive side from the old order to bring into a new world order, and how can we avoid that new world order becomes like a jungle growing back, and we rather have an order based on international law and the principles that have brought us prosperity and freedom for decades?
I guess, and maybe this is the old kind of teacher in me coming out. I think of this a little bit more about a transition of eras rather than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I draw the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is getting replaced wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decades since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I talked about in my remarks, that we are, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like, and at the heart of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order, adapted for the challenges that we face today.
So that was Birger Brender speaking with Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, a former Director of Policy for President Obama, former Chief of Staff to Hillary Clinton at the State Department, absolutely desperately trying not to talk about the New World Order, which, of course, as we all know, is a vicious, debunked, anti-Semitic, far-right conspiracy theory. I know that because it says so on Wikipedia. This is of unimpeachable provenance, and it absolutely has nothing to do with the end-time emergence of the Antichrist either. So they're up there going into bat for the status quo. So let's hear now from the High Priestess of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Dear Klaus, let me go back to the number one concern of the Global Risk Report: disinformation and misinformation. Tackling this has been our focus since the very beginning of my mandate. With our Digital Services Act, we defined the responsibilities of large internet platforms on the content they promote and propagate. A responsible to children and vulnerable groups targeted by hate speech, but also a responsibility to our societies as a whole. Because the boundary between online and offline is getting thinner and thinner. And the values we cherish offline should also be protected online. And this is even more important in this new era of generative AI. Now, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report puts artificial intelligence as one of the top potential risks for the next decade.
So disinformation is the top priority. It actually trumps climate change, which apparently is an existential risk to all of us. The tool that they're using to combat disinformation is regulation. It's all about protecting vulnerable groups from hate speech. We've got to quash vicious rumours about things like the New World Order, for example. Also quashing rumours about von der Leyen's refusal to release text messages between herself and Pfizer CEO Anthony Bourla about the purchase of billions of euros of experimental gene therapies, the ones that Andrew Bridgen has just been talking about a moment ago. It's about stopping us from discussing the death from a heart attack of EU investigator Michelle Ravasi, who was looking into those text messages just before Christmas. It's probably about suppressing discussion of her own husband's extremely profitable pharmaceutical business built around mRNA technology. They're going to do it using AI. We didn't ask for artificial intelligence. It's being foisted on us. And actually, she wants to understand where that's coming from. She just needs to look at the audience at the World Economic Forum and all the people taking high-level meetings with politicians this week. So, final clip, let's hear from Tedros at the World Health Organization.
The other key in order to have better prepared and to address the disease X is the pandemic agreement. The pandemic agreement can bring all the experience, all the challenges that we have faced and all the solutions into one. And that agreement can help us to prepare for the future in a better way, because this is about a common enemy. And without a shared response, starting from the preparedness, we will face the same problem as COVID. And deadline for the pandemic agreement is May 2024, and member states are negotiating. This is between countries, and I hope they will deliver this pandemic agreement by that time, on the deadline, because if this generation cannot do it, we're the lived community, we have the first-hand experience, I don't think incoming generation, the next generation will do it. So for our children and grandchildren's sake, I think we have to convert all the lessons we have learned into this pandemic and prepare the world for the future, because this is a common global interest. And national interest, very narrow national interest, should not come into the way. Of course, national interest is natural, but it's the narrow national interest that could be difficult and affecting the negotiations even as we speak.
So it's COVID all over again, basically. It's the same playbook. They're wargaming this thing called Disease X, which we've actually been talking about on the column for a couple of years now, but it's coming to increased prominence. It's been mentioned on the BBC a lot recently, and they're going to fight back against Disease X, which apparently doesn't exist yet, but they're already building vaccines for it. But ignore that. They're going to consolidate their global power and authority into this pandemic agreement, again, which we've talked about a lot on the show over the past few months. They're going to override national sovereignty in the name of these supposed global interests, i.e. their interests. And I think we should probably assume that this treaty is going to be ratified. We can draw attention to it, we can protest against it, but the grinding gears of the bureaucracy are going to do what they're going to do. And I think they're going to be itching to take their new powers out for a test ride as soon as they're available to them, basically. So summer 2024 is going to be a hot one. I think we should expect to see some action this year. Much more on the World Economic Forum coming up, and also probably next week as well. There's so much to get through, so many statements, and actually it's still running. It's on today. And in fact, Tony Blair is arriving in Davos today to run a session called Recreating Trust. And I cannot wait to hear what he has to say about that.
Indeed. Do you think, Ben, he's also there for his job interview for replacing Klaus?
I think he's already in the door, isn't he? He's probably doing on-the-job training right now. He's in the apprenticeship scheme.
Yes, indeed. Right. Well, look, before we look at what British government has been doing at Davos, let's just listen from another favorite person, I'm sure, of everybody that's watching this.
We make sure that for all these vaccines, that there's enough capacity, that there's competition so the prices keep going down. And we will have new vaccines. We'll have a TB vaccine, malaria vaccine, HIV vaccine, and even the things like COVID vaccines. We need to make them have longer duration, more coverage, and we're going to change, instead of using a needle, to use a little patch. So the pandemic really highlighted that we've been underinvested in those innovations, and our partners in India are part of how we're going to get these breakthrough products done.
So that's a bit more of what we've got to look forward to. Let's Jeremy Hunt decided to go. Let's look at him. There he is. What was he doing there? He was very worried about various things, especially AI and life sciences, because Britain is going to become the great centre for life sciences in the not too distant future. We're already a tech leader in Europe, apparently, with the UK's tech industry worth 3 times as much as Germany's and twice as much as France's. That's brilliant. But AI is a big driver of that. But since the government has already announced multi-million pound investments for the life sciences industry, including 520 million over 5 years for medicines manufacturing and 650 million for life science for growth package. And this was all, of course, mentioned in the autumn statement last November. He was very excited about that. But not the only government minister there. David Cameron there. Here he is meeting Mr. Kuleba from Ukraine. And you can see he's looking very stern. They're very determined, absolutely determined to make sure that we continue to support Ukraine to the death. Then, of course, he was meeting Antony Blinken and Samantha Power as well. They were all there. You'll notice they're wearing their Davos badges. I just thought we would zoom in a little bit on that. And that's what the badge looks like this year. It's a pretty simple thing. Maybe a few people might want to create their own badges for next year or something, and go over and see what's going on from the inside. Okay, let's move on from Davos. If you like the UK column and what we do, you can support us by going to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. That would be very much appreciated. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Debi, what's in your latest blog?
My latest blog is, sorry, I should have put titles up there, but pharmacists, pharmacies, jabs, medicines, Bill Gates, Disease X, all those lovely things that you really want to know about.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Debi. And Ben, let's come back then to a Davos-related story. You talked about Davos House last week.
I did, yes, absolutely. Oh, just on the passes, though, I think it's probably a little bit more complicated than just making a copy. I understand that you have to sign a deal in your own blood with Satan himself in order to get full access to the event. But anyway, we did last week talk about Davos House, and Davos House is the Davos outpost of Gold's House, which is the global propaganda hub for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, essentially. We spoke about some of the attendees. You can see here James Harding, who we mentioned, the editor of Tortoise, but also in particular the tapestry behind James Harding on the wall, which features what appears to be Satan, amongst other things. It's still there, I'm happy to say. So this photo is from Tuesday coming up. And we can see here Her Royal Highness Princess Eugenie, who is co-founder of the Anti-Slavery Collective. She's also on the steering group for Gold's House. We also have our former PM, Theresa May, who is now the chair of the Global Commission for Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking. Also, Jose Manuel Barroso, chair of the board of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, largely funded by Bill Gates, who continues to giggle while talking about vaccines. What is that all about, Bill Gates? Anyway, so they had this meeting in this room about human trafficking. It was a roundtable discussion focused on the role of business and governments in tackling forced labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking. That meeting was held in that room with that tapestry. Bear that in mind. So we discovered, it was a live digging session last week. It was quite a lot of fun, actually. We discovered during the show that this is, in fact, Grayson Perry's Walthamstow tapestry. So thank you to Aki from the UK column community for bringing that to our attention. You can see it here hanging at the Fondazione Cini in 2009. I hope I said that right. And there's a huge version of it. You can see there. A second edition was created in a smaller format, which is 140 by 710 centimetres. And I think that's this one here, which appears to be the version hanging in Davos House. And you can see a much more detailed look of this at artsandculture.google.com. You go and search for the Walthamstow tapestry, and you can zoom in really close detail and see what is on there. This was created by Sir Grayson Perry, CBE. He's quite a highfalutin chap in a dress. He's an English contemporary artist. He's known for his tapestries and cross-dressing and for dissecting British prejudices, fashions, and foibles. He is an interesting character. Like I say, he came from a broken home. He was abused by his stepfather at a young age. He's spoken about having his first basically sadomasochistic sexual experience at the age of 7. It's quite a tragic story, actually. He was estranged from his mother. He didn't go to her funeral when she died. His stepfather told him never to darken their doorstep again when he went off to university. So, the art here on display, I think, comes from a place of significant trauma. But let's hear Grayson Perry talking about the tapestry.
The kind of shopping trip of life, the kind of glossy, sort of meaningless trek from one department store to another. That is modern Western consumerism. And so we've got the 7 ages of man, and then a plethora of familiar brands, some of which perhaps look like they're meant to be under the thing that they're illustrating, and some not. And what's interesting is that they're all in the same font. And so when they're divorced from their product and their logo, all that is left is that emotional resonance of the brand and what they mean to us. So if I say to you EasyJet, some people think great, it means I can go on holiday for cheap, and other people think nightmare. So it's like, I'm not being necessarily judgmental about any of these brands, but there is a moral question to be asked about whether the way that brands inveigle their way into our minds, like the Normans invaded England. So this is the modern Bayeux tapestry in some ways. It's about the subtle invasion of our emotional lives by brands.
So a little bit of background from Perry there. He actually comes across quite well, very well spoken, very articulate and intelligent, but there's just something a little bit unusual about it. Not least the way he's dressed and the content, right? I just can't work him out. He's actually quite on the money with his assessment of modern British life. He talks about the glossy, meaningless trek from one department store to another that is modern Western consumerism. I think we can all resonate with that, actually. He talks about the subtle invasion of our emotional lives by brands, right? Welcome to the World Economic Forum. That's what it's all about. Which brands? So these are the ones listed on the tapestry. Thank you to Biggles from the forum for taking the time to put this list together. And you can see here there's a bunch of very well-known mainstream global corporations, basically. And those are the attendees at Davos. A lot of these organizations are World Economic Forum partners. A lot of them are owned by organizations like BlackRock. They are run ultimately for the benefit of shareholders. They're there to make a profit. And actually, interestingly, many of them use slave labor in their supply chains. So if you look at Apple, for example, they actually use forced labor in concentration camps in their supply chain, the irony of which I'm sure was completely lost on Theresa May and Princess Eugenie, and as they held their little conference in that room earlier this week. Right? It's pretty hypocritical, really, isn't it? You can see Nike's on there as well, for goodness sake. So is this a critique? What is Perry's role here? I don't really get it. Like I said, he comes across quite well. Some kind of court jester type figure, maybe, pointing out the absurdities of the global establishment while at the same time being always invited back to the party and giving knighthoods and CBEs and all of the gongs. One of our viewers has quite a clear opinion on Perry. Thank you to Ned Artist Guna, who sent in this rendition of the tapestry with Grace and Perry in front of it. Art for Davos, in it. Yeah, it's called Ugly Art by Ugly People. You can go and check out Ned's Substack. We'll put the link in the notes. And his little opening paragraph here, I love. From my view of Clown World Continuum, Grayson sits alongside Stephen Fry, Chris Packham, David Attenborough, Brian Cox, both of them, the poster boy scientist and the EU-loving actor, Tracy Emin, the BBC Front Row Show, Eddie Lizard, Blur, Lise Duquet, I think I'm saying that right, Emma Barnett, a long list of right-on, politically correct, cultural Marxist. He is, and his ugly artwork are Davos. Cheers, Ned. That was great. A couple of things to notice, just to wrap up. There's some patterns emerging here. I love this kind of stuff. So it was highlighted during the broadcast that this appears to be the content of the tapestry appears to be an inversion, probably a deliberate inversion of Revelation 12, where a war breaks out in heaven. There are 17 verses in Revelation 12. Walthamstow, the area of East London after which the tapestry is named, its postcode is East 17. Yeah, and there are also 17 sustainable development goals. Right? Is this symbolism? Is this planned ahead of time? I don't know. In fact, was Perry even aware of this stuff while making the tapestry in 2009? The SDGs didn't appear until 2015. Right? So I don't know if this is coordinated, but I thought that was an interesting thing to have a look at. Anyway, enough about that.
Yes, and yes, thank you to Ned from us as well. Debbie, let's come on to you then and the World Health Organization.
Yeah, well, while everybody's been looking at Davos, let's just check out the WHO, who are known to promote health, keep the world safe, and serving the vulnerable. And they're celebrating their 75th anniversary. But what else have they been doing? Well, they've been launching their 2024 emergency appeal. This was only launched on the 15th of January, so Tedros has been very busy. It was launched live streamed. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of the introduction. Tedros was there in person. He made a speech, but I wonder who you can guess had the begging bowl out and was actually promoting the launch. Let's have a look and see.
May we now invite the Right Honourable Gordon Brown, WHO Ambassador for Global Health Financing and former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Today, I want to plead with donors to respond urgently to this emergency appeal to fund vaccines, drugs, treatments, equipment, and medical expertise. You know, hope dies when pharmacy shelves that should be stocked with drugs and treatments are bare, when doctors and nurses don't have the tools. Hope dies when they need to provide the most basic of care and cannot do so, and when vaccines that could save lives are hoarded in the rich north only to be destroyed as they pass their use-by dates. But hope comes alive if we can fund the medicines, provide the doctors, equip the health workers, avoid preventable deaths and suffering. So today I call on the governments listening to this conference today to fund this emergency appeal and support the WHO that is both the solutions and the means to deliver health to the most vulnerable.
Did you feel the passion there? So let's have a look at their health appeal a little bit in a little bit more depth. So there's the front page. If we skip on, we can see Tedros and we can see Dr. Mike Ryan, who are putting out the plea they need donors. So basically, they want your money. But what are these humanitarian emergencies that we're talking about? So if you go into the document, you can see there, waterborne, I won't mention them all, waterborne injury mortality, pressure on health systems and healthcare facilities, mental and psychosocial impact. So you can see all of those things and more mean a humanitarian emergency. However, we've got grade 3 health emergencies. So what are the grade 3s? So the grade 3s are in locations, and you can see some of them there. Again, I'm not going to read them all out, but you've got Haiti, occupied Palestine territory, Syrian Arab Republic, and you've also got the Greater Horn of Africa there. And that's, of course, at the moment where all the container ships are having to go around the Horn of Africa because they can't get through the Suez Canal. So if we go and look at what are the disasters that are going to cause all of these diseases, we can see that the WHO are very much focusing on floods, drought, storms, cyclones, and wildfires. And because of those 4 subjects, you're going to get that impact of vector-borne diseases and waterborne diseases, etc. So what's their role in emergencies, the WHO's role? So their role is all of these things and more: detecting threats, assessing risks, acting as first responders. They are ever present and ever ready. But when you go and look into the health cluster that makes up WHO, and I'd urge you to screenshot this next shot because I had to zoom in, because what you're seeing there is many mentions of many people, including the Johns Hopkins University, UNICEF, Public Health England, which is actually the UK HSA, the CDC, Harvard. They talk about their donors, but I have zoomed in and I have scrutinized that, and I can see no reference to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who we know are I think it's the 2nd or 3rd biggest donor to the WHO. So that's been erased. So keep an eye on the WHO. There's more happening than just WEF.
Debi, thank you very much. And we're going to end today. Well, we've started in quite a dark place with threats of war from the clown show at Davos and other places. What can we do about it? Let's just look at one potential initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a fantastic conversation last week, I think it was, with a gentleman called Glyn, who runs an organisation down in Cornwall called 7 Concerned Citizens, and I think everyone needs to hear about it. So they've been set up to push back against the globalist agenda, specifically as it relates to net zero. So they're talking here about averting a major planning catastrophe. And they've been going to local councils in Cornwall to question the decision-making process around the implementation of net zero policy. So just to give you the context again, so we know exactly what we're talking about, we're all aware that there's a big global push to transition to a zero carbon economic system. It's being driven out of the UN. It's a big part of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's completely inescapable at the moment. So you can see this amazing article from Chatham House. They're really ratcheting up the fear. Nothing at all sensationalist about this image. all this headline from November, which was part of the preamble running into COP28 in Dubai, which we talked about just before Christmas. But it's not just global. As ever, as above, so below, as they say. There's a big global message, but actually where the rubber meets the road is at a local level. And this is happening in the UK right now. It's in our backyard, and it's certainly in your town hall. So this organisation, again, that we've talked about previously, backed by a billionaire, UK 100, has been building a body of local councils to implement net zero policies, to accelerate the implementation of those policies. There was some fantastic work done by the Together campaign to list out all of these councils and to draw awareness to what's happening. So I suggest taking a screen grab of that to see if yours is on there. There's a bunch of biggies: Birmingham Council, Nottingham, Leeds, as well as the ones down in Cornwall that 7 concerned citizens have been focused upon. And basically, these councils have signed up to a completely undemocratic process. They're going to implement a bunch of policies against the best wishes and the best wishes of the public and against the public interest, essentially. So what is the issue? Well, the issue is this: the science, TM, around net zero and climate change is entirely being driven by the United Nations, right? And no dissenting voices are allowed to be heard, right? So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is a UN body, is dictating what is and isn't true and what needs to happen on the ground everywhere globally. It's completely inappropriate. This has been driving the agenda at COP. So we can see here Simon Steele, the head of the UN Climate Change Secretariat, the guy that was leading out COP, the main spokesman for that event before the end of last year, says the 7th assessment cycle, so they've already done 6, we're now on number 7, they do them annually, the 7th assessment cycle of the IPCC must serve as a beacon guiding us towards solutions that are not only ambitious but also rooted in the scientific realities of our world, whilst at the same time, obviously, creating a $750 million, he didn't say this, I'm saying this, a trillion dollar taxpayer-funded marketplace for global corporations and big consulting firms to make an absolute packet implementing these new, completely untested and unproven technologies. I mean, it's extraordinarily dangerous and risky what they're doing. And also, importantly, the science isn't reliable. It's biased, right? So last summer, back in July, the Clintel report was issued. And this came from 1,800 scientists, including Nobel Prize winners. And we can see from this report, it's a very short report, 7 pages. I suggest you go and read it. It's very readable. And you can just see from the charts up on screen there that despite the fact that CO2 levels do appear to be increasing, climate-related deaths are actually going down quite significantly over the past 100 years, right? This is not a pressing issue in terms of human life. And all of the future projections, just like COVID, all of the future projections that the IPCC has been relying on are based on computer models. So they are massively open to manipulation, right? They are incredibly misleading. You can make tiny assumptions and tiny introductions into the data about what we think is going to happen in the future that will have an incredible impact on what the models say, right? You can really get them to do whatever you want, right? So it's a very manipulative way of presenting science. So a little quote here from the report. For example, think of the many wrong predictions by economic models, or think of the large mistakes in recent pandemic modeling. The output of the computer models depends fully on the assumptions that model makers put into them. In the past 50 years, the predictions of climate models about global warming and their dire effects have all been wrong. Yeah, they have all been wrong. In the engineering community, they would be qualified as useless, right? But these useless models are being used by politicians and activists to terrorize people. Yeah, so if we look at this recent article from The Guardian, these predictions from the IPCC were used to create a computer simulation of what high tide would look like imbued in Cornwall. So on the left, we have the 2020 average high tide levels. And then on the right, we have 2050. And you can see a whole bunch of infrastructure there has been completely wiped out based on these predictions. And they've used this, and it's not just in Cornwall, that's a local example, but it's happening absolutely everywhere globally, right? This information is being used to manipulate citizens into going along with a whole bunch of climate-related activities, transformations of their way of life, the economic system that surrounds them, that they would not have agreed to if they hadn't been lied to by these citizens and by these activists and by these politicians. And they're also using this, as I've spoken about previously, as a way to bring in things like citizens' assemblies and sortition to make decisions around climate policy. This whole thing is absolutely corrupt. And then into this mix, step 7 concerned citizens, because they want to sort this out. Good on them, right? And in their introduction, they say here that it's an independent, citizen-run effort to support and work with councils, their officers, and our wider community in order to avert a major catastrophe associated with emergency planning and declared emergencies. Right, and essentially what they're pointing out is that local councils, which are basically set up to take your bins out, right? I mean, that's more or less what they're there to do, or activities of similar complexity, are not fit for purpose when it comes to making big strategic decisions about highly contentious, advanced climate models that they don't understand. Right, it's complete nonsense. And they're doing fantastic work. They're here to point out the system isn't fit for purpose. They've been working with good people inside the councils. Like, there are good people inside the councils. That's really important for us to understand. And they're basically using the bureaucracy and the system against itself. Last year, they started off by presenting. They did 5 presentations to 4 officers of the council, talking about the proposed climate emergency action plan, the implications of the plan for the region, businesses and its citizens, the fact that council planning systems are not fit for purpose, the pragmatism of the policy and the nature of the scientific information, its provenance and where it came from. They organised a protest. So they had 200 concerned citizens. The 7 coordinated 200 to go outside the council offices to do a protest. It was roundly ignored. They escalated this to the CEO of Torbay Council and the head auditor. All right, this is really important. This is about assurance. It's about audit. It's about the structural integrity of these organisations. Right, that they have a duty to respond to information that is sent to them in the correct fashion. Right, so they escalated to the CEO. They sent 4 freedom of information requests. If we just nip back one, actually, sorry. They then reviewed that information. So you can see the process that took place through last year. And then they were told by the council, they actually received a message from the council saying that we have nothing more to discuss with you. And they've then consolidated all of that into a 5th letter, which captures all of the findings and recommendations. And the summary here, which you can see, is essentially that the council is not fit for the purpose of conducting emergency planning and execution. The present organisation system, left uncorrected, poses a significant, elevated and imminent threat of harm to the well-being of the region and its people. The likely impacts, risks and unintended consequences arising from the policies and strategies being developed through the current organisation system will have catastrophic implications lasting for generations. Right? Now, that is an absolute nightmare. Or if you're the CEO of a council or the chief auditor of a council, that is the stuff of nightmares, right? This is kryptonite to the bureaucracy, and I think that although it is a bit dry, it's procedural, it's technical, it's bureaucratic, this might work. I think that they're clearly already getting traction. I think that the Torbay and Cornwall councils have got a fight on their hand. They've got some big questions that need to be answered about the decisions that they've made and the process that they've used to arrive at those decisions. And importantly, I think that there is a template here for national action that we've been talking about a lot on the show. And I'm excited to see how this develops over the coming months.
Okay, brilliant. Ben, thank you very much for that. Well, we've got to leave it there for today, perhaps on a bit of good news. We will be back in a couple of minutes for some extra. We'll discuss these issues a bit more. If you aren't able to join us for that, we'll be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.